Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Brian Sukup, Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for the American Society of Interior Designers, and I'm joined by Emily Kelly, IIDA's Government Affairs Staff Leader. Welcome to the final installment in a series of 6 jointly hosted ASID and IIDA advocacy trainings. ASID and IIDA believe that all interior designers, ASID, IIDA, and unaffiliated, must work together to present a strong, unified front to advance and defend the profession in the legislative and regulatory arena. As a result, ASID and IIDA are committed to providing you with tools to effectively advocate for the profession. Today's webinar is led by Andrew Goldberg from Agora. Andrew is a seasoned government affairs professional with years of experience leading government affairs initiatives in the design and built environment industries. Before we begin, this is an important reminder that participants will be eligible for continuing education credit from IDCEC. This course is not eligible for HSW credit. All lines are currently muted, but if you have questions, please use the question box function, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the program. Without further delay, IIDA and ASID would like to welcome Andrew Goldberg. Andrew?
Hi, Brian. Thanks so much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar today. Now, during this series, we've talked about why it's important to be an advocate for your profession. We've discussed how to build effective relationships with policymakers, and how you can make sure that the message you are conveying is as effective as it can be. And we've talked about how to leverage legislative and political events to increase your ability to be successful as an advocate. Now, this is our 6th and final webinar in the series, and for this one, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to run through a simulated advocacy campaign showing step by step from the moment that an issue arises, how you can use the lessons learned in this series to be successful. So there's going to be a review of some of the information that was provided in the previous 5 webinars, but instead of talking about it theoretically, we're going to see how these ideas work in the real world. Now, what that means is that there are going to be things that will happen that aren't always planned or expected, and you may have to make adjustments in your strategy along the way. And there'll be moments when you'll have to make some difficult choices about which way to go, which will have an impact on your strategy and whether or not you'll be successful. So for this exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to create a fictitious state that has a legislature and a governor, and ASID and IIDA chapters. The state, of course, will not be exactly like your state, and the obstacles you face in the political climate and culture will be different in every state. But by doing a simulation, we hope to show how you could take any advocacy challenge that's before you and succeed. So with that, let's get started. And I'd like to welcome everybody on the call to the great state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a fairly large state in the central part of the country, has a few major cities, including its capital, which conveniently is called Capital City. It has suburban areas, rural areas. Politically, it's a swing state. Neither party has a real solid control on the state. Now, in Capital City, of course, there is a legislature, an upper body, a Senate, a lower body, the House, and of course, the governor. And right now in Pennsylvania, Democrats control the legislature. They have a small majority of seats, but they have the majority. So the Speaker of the State House and the leader of the State Senate and the chairman of the committees are all Democrats. The governor is a Republican. And of course, ASID and IIDA both have fairly active chapters that are headquartered in Capital City. Now, Pennsylvania's economy has been fairly strong for the past 5 to 6 years or so. But in recent years, it's weakened a little bit. And as a result, that's reduced tax revenue coming into the state government. Pennsylvania, like many states, has a balanced budget requirement, meaning the legislature and the governor have to pass a balanced budget every year. And because tax revenues are down, there's talk that the state is going to have to find a way to maybe perhaps raise revenue, raise taxes in some way. What that means is there'll probably be a tax package, some kind of tax bill coming through the legislature in this session that may raise taxes on different groups. And as the session starts on January 2nd, there's a lot of talk in the Capitol, a lot of buzz about what will actually be in that tax bill and who it will impact. Well, then on the morning of January 3rd, the ASID contract lobbyist reports back that the chairman of the House Revenue Committee, which handles tax policy, is considering adding to his tax plan a sales tax on professional services. This would be a tax on any services provided by certain kind of professionals, including interior designers, and it would equal about 7%, which is the current state sales tax on goods. Now, even worse, the IIDA contract lobbyist has heard that the governor, even though he generally opposes tax increases, he might sign this bill into law if it passes, even if it includes a sales tax on professional services, because they have to balance the budget. Now, I don't have to tell you that a professional sales tax would be very harmful to interior designers in the state. Currently, around the country, less than 5 states, I believe, tax interior design services not related to the sale of tangible personal property. And actually, none of the states that border Pennsylvania have one. So if that tax goes through and goes into law, it would really create a competitive disadvantage for interior designers in Pennsylvania compared to those in neighboring states. So this is a big deal. This could really harm the profession. So what do? If you're ASID and IIDA and the head of advocacy, how do you react to this? Well, the first thing I would say to do is don't panic. If you have a good strategy, you can stop this, and you can actually prevent this sales tax from becoming law. What you need essentially is an advocacy campaign. And I'll say that in this world of government relations and politics, we often talk about campaigns. We often mean an election campaign, a political campaign, helping somebody run for office and be elected. We also talk about campaigns in the context of legislation. An advocacy campaign is one in which you work in a fairly short period of time to build support for your position, using various tools to get the legislature and the governor to support your position. And that's what you have to create. You have to create a campaign to stop the sales tax. Now, every campaign has 3 important elements to it. It has a goal or goals, the way you want to go, the strategies, kind of broadly how you're going to get there, and then tactics, the very specific actions you will take in order to get there. And I'll say, and I mentioned this in a previous webinar, that the temptation a lot of times is to jump right into the tactics. There's some big issue coming up, so it's immediately you run up to Capitol Hill and deal with it, or let's put ads in the newspaper or something. And it's really important when developing a campaign to spend time developing your strategy, because if your tactics don't help advance those strategies, you're going to end up wasting time and resources and energy on activities, tactics that aren't going to help you get to your goal. So first, you have to figure out what the goal is. Now, a couple of things for the goal. First of all, you have to figure out how much time do you have. What is the timeline you have in order to make sure that this doesn't pass? Now, the Revenue Committee needs to pass their tax package by January 31st, for it to go to the full House. So your goal really is, you really want to make sure that that sales tax is not included in the committee bill. It's always much easier to stop legislation early in the process and try to get it removed later on. So based upon that, you find out on January 3rd, it's maybe in the bill, it comes up in 4 weeks. So you have about 4 weeks. But in reality, you have actually a little less time than that. And the reason is that what you've heard is that generally speaking, whatever this committee deals with big tax bills, they like to have the staff put out a draft of the bill a week or so before the bill actually comes to a vote. What that means is that really by January 24th, or actually 3 weeks, you want to make sure that that sales tax is not included in the staff bill. And the way to do that, the best way to do that is to try to get a majority of the members on that committee to say they oppose the sales tax. Chances are, if you have a majority of the committee on record saying we don't want a professional sales tax, the staff will put it into that draft. So that really is your goal here. Your goal is to do what you can to get a majority of members on the committee to keep a sales tax idea out of that staff draft tax plan. If you do that, your chances of keeping it out of the bill when it goes to the House and the Senate and so on are much better. So that's your goal. Now, what are your strategies? How are you going to make that happen? How are you going to make sure that it stays out of the bill? and get a majority of members on the committee to say they oppose a sales tax. Well, back in our, I think it was our fourth webinar over the summer, we talked about kind of the 5 key elements of building an advocacy campaign. And this is where that comes into play. And you want to spend some time thinking about what that strategy looks like. What are the elements you're going to use for the next 3 weeks to make sure that provision is not in the staff draft? As I said, there are 5 elements to any legislative campaign. The first big ones are first the policy, what it is you're actually trying to get done. The legislative, which means who do you have to actually convince to take your side, and then the grassroots and grass tops, which is getting the citizens, the general public, or people, everyday citizens, to convince their legislators to take that position. Communications, which is about making sure that the message you are sending, why this policy is important, making sure that gets out and is heard by the right people. And last, coalitions. It's working with other organizations or groups that have the same view, working together to help increase your influence and make sure that what it is gets done. So I'm going to go through all 5 quickly and talk about how it applies in this specific situation. So first and foremost, policy. We're talking about what your campaign goals are, your policy. There are really 4 main questions. What is it you're advocating for or against? Why is that your position? How will you advance this position in the legislature? You want to pass a bill, approve an amendment, and also when will the legislature act? What is your time frame? Now, in this case, we've already covered 3 of those, right? We know what we're advocating for. We're advocating, or against, rather. We're advocating against the sales tax. We talked about how do you make sure this position succeeds. You want to keep it out of the staff draft. And when will the legislature act? We said you want to do that in 3 weeks, by the end of January. So that leaves with the second key part, which is why do you have this position? Why is it that interior designers are opposed to this? Now, obviously, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to recognize that, of course, interior designers would be against a sales tax on interior design. Nobody wants to have their own profession or their own business taxed. But that's probably not enough of a message to go up there and say, I'm an interior designer, I don't want a tax on my services. A good message really has to resonate with people who are outside the profession. It has to be, as we talked about, a good message has to be concise. It has to have a clear purpose, the problem, the solution. It has to be targeted to the audience. It has to convey passion and be in plain English, and it has to have a call to action. You have to be able to say, oppose a professional sales tax, and here's why. And as we also covered in some of the previous webinars, a good message follows what is the Aristotle's theory that every message has to have, ethos, which means credibility, pathos, an appeal to sort of emotion or passion, and as well as logos, logic, facts, and figures. So you have to develop your rationale to bring to the legislature of why you think the sales tax is a bad idea. Now, the good news for you is that your national organizations, ASID and IIDA, they've been down this road before. They have lots of information about the sales tax and the impact on members because this has been dealt with in other states. And if you go on to their websites, and that's where this comes from, you can find a testimony that was given in other states, other information provided by ASID and IIDA that could help make that strong case against the sales tax. What you want to do is take this information that's already there, not recreate it, but then add things to it that make it more Pennsylvania specific. So talk about the number of interior designers in the state, pointing out that no bordering states to Pennsylvania have a sales tax, so it created a disadvantage. If you can get quotes or comments or testimonials from interior designers in the state saying that this would be harmful to them, add that in there. So taking the overarching, the general message, and then making it more specific to Pennsylvania. And that's how you kind of create the overall message that you are trying to get across. The next part then, of course, is legislative. It is who do you want to get that message? Who do you want to actually receive that message? And of course, you probably want every member of the legislature to come out opposed to a sales tax. But like you said, right now, your goal is in the committee, the revenue committee. It's getting a majority of members of that committee to be opposed. Now, there are 21 members of the Pennsylvania House Revenue Committee, which means that you want to have at least 11 members of the committee, a majority, on your side, meaning against the sales tax. Now, to begin with, there at the very beginning of January, you want to figure out, well, where are they now? How do we start? And the best way to find out is to call up and ask them. And we talked about this in one of the previous webinars. You can create a chart like this. You have on the right side, on the left side, you have those who are strongly in favor. Then you have people who are leaning in favor of your side. On the other side, you have strongly against and leaning against. And in the middle, those members who are either undecided or you just can't reach them, you don't know their position. And after making some calls around, you find out this is what the committee looks like. There are 21 members. As you can see, there are 2 in the double plus column who are firmly on your side. They totally agree sales tax is a bad idea. 3 who are leaning, but not definite. A bunch who are undecided, a few who are leaning against, and then 3, including the chair, who are against you. They support a sales tax. Now, what does that mean? That means that ideally you want to have 11 in that far left column. You want to have 11 strongly against. So you really want to get 9 more members into that column with the 2 who are already there. Now, as we talked about this process, a couple of things that you can do in this situation, because you want to reach all the members. That's a lot of people, a lot of offices to actually talk to. So the first thing you can do is put aside those whose position is pretty firm. If they're strongly with you or strongly against you, you don't want to spend a lot of time talking to them. You want to focus on those in the middle, those who are leaning for or against or are undecided. And that is 16 members, so it's a little less. That's your target. From that group of 16, you want to be able to identify and get 9 more of those members to agree with you to be strongly against a sales tax. And if you can do that, then the staff will most likely not put it into the bill. So you have 16. Now, how do you go about? You start by calling up everybody on that list? Not necessarily. You could do some more prioritization. For example, there are 3 members of that committee in the undecided, Barnes, Quill, and Wilson, who, talking to your lobbyists and others, pretty much always vote with the chairman. So they're going to be kind of hard to get. So maybe they'll lower priority because they'll probably go with whatever the chairman wants to do. In addition, there are 5 members there who interior designers already have a good relationship with. Either there's an interior designer who knows them or they've been in to talk with them a lot before. So you already have a bunch of members you have a good relationship with. And that's important because you're going to need champions and people who know you and people who then will be more likely to agree with you. So again, if your goal is to get 9 more members to support your position, this is where then the grassroots and the grass tops and the other strategies come into place. So grassroots and grass tops. And as we talked about before, and I think one theme that's gone through this entire series, it's that citizen advocates, everyday people volunteering their time to advocate for their position, they're probably the most effective advocates you have, maybe even more so than professional lobbyists. Why? Because they're from the district. They're from back home. They carry that kind of credibility. They are voters, and politicians listen to the people from back home. As we talked about, grass tops are those who have a good relationship already with a lawmaker. It's somebody they can call up. It's somebody who, if they saw the legislator in the supermarket, the legislator might know them and say hi to them. Somebody who already has a kind of connection. Grassroots are kind of the more broad. It's sort of everybody who is a constituent in a legislator's district who may not know them personally, but still has the ability to go and advocate for their position. Now, in the ideal world, you would have a grass tops connection to all members of the Revenue Committee, and certainly the 16 or so who are in that middle area. And the reality is, well, you don't. In this case, in Pennsylvania, you have those connections to 5 of them, which is good, but you have to build more. How do you do that in a hurry? How do you actually build those relationships? Well, another concept that we talked about early in the year was building something called a power map. A power map is just really, it's a diagram where you put the legislator, the target, in the center, and you identify all those sorts of affiliations and connections. Their community affiliations, groups they work with, their professional affiliations, where they went to school, their kind of political connections in the community, and then you try to identify where there are interior designers or other supporters of ASID and IIDA who have connections. So if there's an interior designer, for example, who is a member of the Kiwanis Club with this delegate Smith, there's a possible connection. If there's somebody who graduated from the same high school, the same year with them. That's a possible connection. It's kind of like LinkedIn a little bit. And you're trying to identify those people who you can go to. If you're designers, you can then go and say, hey, you have a connection to Delegate Smith. He's a target of ours. We need to get this message to him. Will you be willing to reach out to him? And hopefully they will say yes. And what you want to do then, is you build a chart, and it shows all the targets on the left side, kind of their status, whether they're leaning forward, leaning against. And then you have that Grasstops contact, and the day you assign them to ask them to make the contact. And we'll get in a little bit to kind of how you help them make that contact, as well as on the other side, when they reach them and what the outcome was. If Jill from Smith Interiors talked to Representative Colson, and Colson then said, okay, yeah, I'm with you. Well, you can go back to that earlier chart and move them from the single plus to the double plus column. And you make sure you're touching every person. And as you build your power map, you then add more names onto this, more targets of members. And that is the way you would start to build out how you reach every target member of the committee in a way to make sure that you can have a really good conversation with them. Now, at the same time you're doing this, you also want to do the grassroots work. Even if you don't know the legislator, even if you don't have somebody who has a good relationship, you still want to use all of the interior designers and their allies who are back home in the district to reach out to them. That is also effective. If folks in the legislature get a lot of messages and hear a lot from the folks back home, that does make a difference. And so there are a lot of ways to do that. First and foremost, there are action alerts. Like many organizations, ASID and IIDA have the ability to send out messages to their members in a certain state or even a certain district and ask them to contact their elected representative with a message, oppose the sales tax. And it's a process, it's a function that's very easy to use. With just a few clicks, then anybody can send a message to their legislator. And so you want to make sure you do that. And that does help. I mean, emails are not as effective, of course, as a face-to-face meeting with somebody you know, but they do make a difference if they get a lot of emails and messages from folks back home saying oppose this. You can take it up a notch and do phone calls. And I think ASID has a program where you can send phone calls. You can call your legislature, and that also has a big impact. Last but not least, and this is much more involved, and I'm not suggesting that you would do this in a 3-week period, but you also can do bring people in. It's called a fly-in, or you can bust people in, actually have meetings with a legislator. Now, like I said, that's certainly is effective. You get a lot of meetings that way. It is hard to develop and organize within 3 weeks. However, as you'll see later, there are ways you can do that that are a lot easier. But like I said, ASID and IIDA, the national offices, have all the kind of resources you need to help make sure that you can get to the members in the state, particularly in the districts of those key target representatives, and get messages to them and build out the grassroots. So you have the grass tops, which are the people who really know them, hitting them with these messages. You also have grassroots, the broad numbers of members back home going up, pressuring the Hill and saying, hey, we don't want the sales tax. Now, one more thing. I mentioned before that Hill days are a very effective way to actually get your members in front of a legislature, but they're hard to organize. But here's the thing. In Pennsylvania, it turns out that on January 18th, ASID and IIDA are hosting a continuing education seminar in the capital city. And about 40 or so interior designers are coming into town that day for that session. Why not see if you can get those members already in town to stay maybe a little bit longer or come in a little bit earlier and actually go up to the Hill and talk to their elected representatives. We would do that a lot when I was with AIA. If we had members coming into Washington or a board meeting, we would ask them to come in a little bit earlier or find some free time and go up to Capitol Hill and talk to the representatives. If you already have members coming into town where they could then easily go to Capitol Hill, take advantage of that. Use some of the activities and things already happening in the chapter and utilize them to help advance your advocacy. So that's how you use members and get members, your members, interior designers, to engage with the legislators. Next, communications. We talked earlier about developing the message. Now you want to get that message out there. You want to make sure everybody is saying the same message, why the sales tax is a bad idea. And in advocacy, there are a few kind of basic kinds of documents content that you want to be using all the time and develop for this campaign. First and foremost is an issue brief, and that's kind of the basic currency of advocacy. An issue brief is a one-page, at most two-page document that gives a narrative about why you have a certain position and makes the ask. It says on there, oppose a sales tax. It's something that you can leave and bring to a legislator and leave with them that summarizes the issue. You can also, of course, post it online, share it with social media and everything else, but it really kind of captures in a short way, the story you are trying to send. Next are talking points. Talking points is a document that it's a set of bulleted statements that you can use and share with your advocates so that when they go talk to the legislators, they have handy kind of the key points they want to make. Talking points are not a script. You don't want your members meeting with the legislator and then reading from a piece of paper. You want them talking in their own words, but talking points help remind them of the key points you want to make and make sure the message they're sending aligns with everything else you're doing, the issue brief and everything else. You also may want to do a press release, a press statement, get it out to the media. You can also send it up to people on the Hill as well. That once again, it reinforces those kinds of messages. Once you develop the issue brief and the talking points and the press release, you really have a pretty good basis for the kinds of information that you need to share with your grassroots advocates, your grass tops people when they go talk to members, and when you go up to the Hill as well. Now, those are kind of the materials you use. What are the sort of the channels you use to get out that communications? One, of course, is talking to the press, talking to the media. Are there reporters who cover the Capitol? Have there been stories in any of the big papers in the capital city or other cities about the tax debate? You find out who the reporter is and send them a message. Send them the press release. Let them know what's going on. They might not print it necessarily, but they now know that you are a potential source to talk to about the bill. And this helps create more awareness around what the legislature is doing. You can use social media. It's a very effective tool. There are a lot of legislators are on social media. A lot of interior designers are on social media. And by posting things on Twitter and Facebook and even Instagram, and tagging if you can some of the legislators, you can get some messages out there. You can create a hashtag related to the campaign that your members can use. It not only helps you get in touch or communicate more with legislators, it helps you communicate back with other interior designers in the state so they know what's going on and get involved. And last but not least, there are newspapers. All newspapers run op-eds, editorials, letters to the editor. You can develop a template op-ed, or the ASID and IIDA staff can help you, that you can then encourage a member or members to put in the paper, in their local paper. And it's in the paper, which usually is online, and you can also put that out also with social media. Now, none of these kinds of communications tactics alone will probably influence a member of the legislature. That still take that grassroots and grass tops. But by creating more volume, adding to the volume of stories and attention and media around this issue and making that case of why the sales tax is a bad idea, that helps. It helps make sure that people in the capital city know what's going on, and that if there's opposition to this idea, it helps the members, your interior designer members back in the district, also know what's going on and help them get involved. Now, there's one more thing that you can do. You can, as I said before, part of the message is the pathos, the sort of emotional connection, the stories from members and how it hurt them, but also having good data is helpful. Now, in 3 weeks, you probably can't do a whole big, economic study on the impact of interior design sales tax, but you could do something like a survey. Send out a survey, even on SurveyMonkey or Google Docs, to your members, asking, what would the impact be if the sales tax passes? And when you get the results back, you can then turn that into a survey. You can put that on your website. You can publish it. You can send out a press release about that. You can utilize social media about it. All these ways that you can then use that data to help further the argument that you are making by providing this kind of new content, this new information that wasn't available before at a relatively low cost. And last but not least, the fifth element of the strategy is coalitions. And coalitions are a very effective way to get more people on your side. Now remember, this sales tax proposal doesn't just affect interior designers, it'll affect architects and engineers and landscape architects and accountants and other professions. All those groups are going to want to fight it as well. If you join together in a coalition, that's very helpful. It increases your power. You have more people now talking and sharing the same message. It also helps you fill gaps. Let's say one of those target members on the revenue committee is somebody you just can't get in front of. You just can't find a connection. Well, maybe the Architects Association or the engineers have a contact with that person. And so you help to kind of fill the gaps. Now, as it turns out, in Pennsylvania, one of the engineering societies is organizing a coalition with a whole bunch of members, the Pennsylvanians Against Professional Sales Tax. So that's something you may want to join. Now, in this case, in Pennsylvania, I'll say that the engineers are asking all the groups to pony up $500 for it to help pay for ads or mailings or things like that. And so one thing you have to think about as you develop your advocacy campaign is, do you have additional funding available? Can you afford to do this? But also you have to ask yourself, can you afford not to? If you're not part of that coalition, then you might miss out on opportunities to really engage and make sure that interior designers are at the table. And so, coalitions may have some costs to them, but the benefits of a coalition, of having more groups and more people on your side is really, really important. And I really can't understate or overstate rather how important that is. So those are the kind of 5 strategies. And from that, you can really build out and develop kind of a master plan. Remember, your goal with all this is about getting 9 of those 16 squishy members in the middle there, 9 of them to become strong supporters of your position. And so you can list all of them and then show how you are actually engaging them. You're doing what's the grass tops? How are we contacting them? Are we doing communications that really target them? Are some of them really active on Twitter? And so you can tweet towards them and using tag them in a tweet. Are some is one of them from a city where it has a very influential newspaper? Maybe use some extra effort, talk to that reporter with that newspaper, so you really make sure that that member hears that. And is there other ways that other coalition members can also fill in the blanks? And what you're doing, you're trying to find gaps. Are there members here that you just don't really have good connections to, or you're not touching or not hitting with your advocacy? That helps you understand where you may need to put some extra work, or perhaps you say, well, that person's not a priority. If there's a certain member, like there's an Okie at the bottom there who, you don't have any grass tops, there's no real avenue for communications, nobody in coalition knows them, maybe they're a lower priority for right now, and you focus on the other members to try to get them on your side. Remember, you don't need all of them to agree with you. You need to get 9 out of these 16 on your side. So that's how you build out that strategy of using those elements to reach the goal, which is getting members of the committee, a majority, to take their position. Now we can turn to the tactics. And there, in that early part of the process, you can start to develop out what some of the key tasks you have to do in that first week. You have to finalize your message, your materials, your issue brief, your talking points. You want to send that information out to the grass tops and give assignments. This person will contact this legislator. You want to get out an action alert to your members about how you're going to get the grassroots involved. You can write a draft op-ed, put out a press release. All these sorts of tasks now are clear, and you can look at every task and say, this is how it helps further a strategy that gets us to a goal. So all of these tasks here are aligned with the strategy and the goal, so you're actually not going to be wasting time, but doing things that really help get you to the goal. And last but not least, at the bottom there, you want to get a message out to your members. You want to let them know what's happening. Let them know that mistakes, that there's a risk they could have a sales tax if they don't act, and let them know that ASID and IIDA are on the case. They're working on this. So really by within a week or so, less than a week, you have that plan done. You have all these pieces ready to go. You have your grass tops advocates reaching out to their members. You have an action alert out there, press release. All these pieces are starting to click. And then on January 11th, you find out that the Revenue Committee is going to hold a hearing on their tax package, and it's going to be on January 22nd. It'll be the only hearing that they will hold about the tax bill before they vote on it. And it's really important, I would say, to get a member interior designer there to testify. Maybe not going to bring in hundreds of interior designers, but to have 1 or 2 come in to testify, particularly if they are from a district of a member on the committee that will be very helpful, because other groups are going to do the same thing. They're going to send their members to testify why a tax on their profession or industry is a bad idea. And if you're not there, it would be kind of conspicuous by your absence. So you want to make sure that's an important date you get somebody to the hearing. Well, now it's been about a week or so. Your plan is in motion, and you want to take stock of where you are. And at the start, remember, there were 2 members who were firmly on your side, a whole bunch who were undecided. There were more who were leaning against. Well, things are now moving. You now have 3 members who are firmly on your side. You picked up 1. There are a few more who are leaning in favor. Hopefully, you can convert them to being strong supporters of your position. And there are fewer on the other side. So things are happening. They're working. However, on January 17th, something unexpected happens. And as I said, sometimes things happen that are unexpected. And in this case, on January 17th, you find out that one of the members who was a solid no, or was solid on your side, has just cut a deal with the chairman of the Revenue Committee. And in that deal, he says he will not oppose a sales tax on professional services in exchange for the chairman putting something else into the bill that he wants, something unrelated to interior designers. Well, that's bad news. It's unexpected. For one thing, that means that you have one less solid member on your side. It also means that now the chairman is also working to try to cut deals with other members. And how do you react to that? By definition, unexpected developments are unexpected. You can't plan for them. But it's important to remember that if you have a strong strategy and a strong game plan, you need to stick with that. At the end of the day, what this means is that what you are doing to get more of those members in the middle to take your side, that's still important. That still matters. You still do the same thing. You make the case and to those members and show their strong support for your position. Now, what do you do about the member who switched sides on you? Do you put out a press release or something blasting them for doing that? I would recommend no. It's never a good idea to burn bridges. You may need them later on for something else, but you may also want to keep it in the back of your mind that maybe they're not as reliable as you thought on later issues. But at the end of the day, things like this will happen, and sometimes you just have to say that's part of the process, and we have to keep pushing on to move forward. Now, next day is January 18th, and as you may recall, there's going to be a continuing education seminar there in the capital city, and about 40 or so interior designers coming into town, and you're able to get a bunch of them, most of them, up to the hill to meet with their members. In fact, 2 of them come from the district of one of those undecided Revenue Committee members, and they actually convinced her to agree with you. So you actually helped move somebody over. You didn't do a whole big hill fly-in, but because you had members in town, they were able to be effective. And now, after all that, losing a member, gaining a member, here's how things look on January 18th. You have now 4 on your side, so you're moving up. Again, you have 9 total who are leaning in your position. There are fewer who are against you, and that's really what you want to do, is you want to start moving as many members as you can from the right side of the chart to the left side onto your side. So things are working. They are happening. Now, the next day, the next big thing is on January 22nd, which is the committee hearing in the Revenue Committee about the tax bill. You were able to get a couple of members to come into town, testify. You help prepare testimony thanks to the help of the ASID and IIDA trackers. Those 2 members who testified both are in districts of members of the committee, and so you're able to arrange them to meet one-on-one with their representatives after the hearing so they can kind of continue to press the case. Things look pretty good, right? Well, there's another unexpected development, because that's what happens sometimes. And this one is this. The morning of the hearing, you found out that the Pennsylvania Association of Big and Personal Home Improvement Stores has written to every member of the committee supporting a tax on design and construction services provided by design professionals. And they make the case in their letter. What they say is that interior designers tend to work for wealthy clients. Interior designers are very well paid, and therefore they should have to shoulder some more of the tax burden. Now, we all know that's not accurate, it's not fair, it's not a correct assessment, but that's what the group said. They put a message out to the committee that says you should put a tax on interior designers. Okay, that's a problem. How do you deal with it? Now, again, do you abandon your entire strategy? No, but perhaps you need to adjust your messaging and making the argument reinforce the argument that interior designers are small business people. They're maybe one or two person firms, sole practitioners, talk about how they work with people of all income levels, how interior designers are not necessarily the wealthiest people in the world, and how they are small business people who need the support of the legislature to help them. So you want to reinforce messages to rebut what this association said, and you want to get those points to members of the committee. You want to share them with your champions on the Hill, people who are already on your side, so they can push back against them. You also probably want to maybe you want to amend the testimony of the members before the hearing. So you want to make some adjustments to your message based upon that, but you don't want to abandon your entire strategy. Fundamentally, you're still doing the same thing, engaging with the members on the committee to make sure they are on your side. Something else you can do. Remember that survey you did a few weeks ago? It showed 75% of interior designers in Pennsylvania would have to cut jobs if it passes. Release it again. Now, you might think, gee, why should we release it again? It's already out there. It's not new news. Well, here's the thing. You know that, but policymakers and the media are so inundated by materials and information all the time. They might not remember getting it a couple of weeks ago. Put it out again. Use it to reinforce your message. That interior designers are job creators, which is very important for every community in the state, and putting a sales tax on them would be, as a contrary to what this big association said, it would be a bad idea. Well, so now it's January 23rd, the day after the hearing went well. You actually got a couple of members to move on your side, and that day you get a call from the chairman's staff, the top staff person for the committee, and they said they're starting to put together the draft of the tax bill. And they've heard there's some opposition to the sales tax, and they want to make a deal with you. They'll include sales tax, but instead of putting it at 7%, they'll only put it at 3.5%. And they say, would you be okay with that? Could you then come out and support the bill? So what do? Do you take this deal, or do you reject it? Well, the first thing you should do, of course, is contact the members of your coalition and find out if they get the same message, the same offer. It's not unheard of for people in the legislature that try to kind of put a wedge through opposition groups. You want to make sure that everybody heard the same message, and you want to make sure that if they did, nobody goes back to the chairman, to the committee, without talking first. You want to keep the coalition together. Well, what do you do in this situation? Is that a good deal, or is it not? I mean, if you accept the deal, then you guarantee there won't be a 7% sales tax. If you reject it, you could still win and have no sales tax, or you could lose and have it at 7%. A couple of observations I would make here. First of all, here's the good news. Committee staff wouldn't have come to you with this deal if they were confident that they had the votes to pass it at 7%. The fact that they are trying to make this deal shows they're a little scared. They know the opposition is working. So that's a good sign. It shows your advocacy is having an impact on the committee. The other point to think about is you have now a number of members of the committee who've come out strongly and said we oppose a sales tax at all, any sales tax. If you were now to come back and accept the deal, and at 3.5%, you kind of leave them out on a limb a little bit, right? Because they came out and said we're against any sales tax. If you now accept a smaller sales tax, they either have to kind of change their position, which no elected official wants to do, or they're going to be in this weird position of opposing something that the target of the tax is not against. So you have to think about these things and think about where the coalition is. And in this case, I will say you decide collectively not to take the deal. You say thanks, but no thanks. We're going to keep fighting because we believe there should be no tax whatsoever. So you push on. Well, the next day is January 24th. That's the day the staff draft is supposed to come out. And sure enough, at 3 p.m., the lobbyists get a copy of the initial staff draft of the tax bill, and they email it to you in a PDF form. This is it. You find out, did you succeed in keeping the sales tax out of the bill, or was all your work for naught if they put the sales tax into the bill? So you take out your phone and you click on the PDF and you read through the bill, and well, I hate to leave you hanging, but this is the end of the scenario. I'm not going to say what happens, and honestly, I don't know what happens. And I say this for a very specific reason. In advocacy, you can do everything right. You can have a great plan, a great strategy, do everything right, and you still sometimes you might lose. By the same token, sometimes you may have no strategy and do everything wrong and get lucky, although that's pretty rare. But at the end of the day, you can't fully control what the legislature does because you don't have a vote there. The legislators do. So you can make the best case and reach people and advocate, and sometimes that might not be enough. But here's the thing. All you really can do at the end of an advocacy campaign is say, did we do everything we possibly could to make our case and build support for our position? And if you did everything you could, then you've done your job. And like I said, more often than not, if you do that, you are going to be successful. Let's remember something also. No matter what is in that bill at the House committee, that's not the end of the process. It still has to go to the full House, and then it goes to the Senate Tax Committee and the full Senate and the governor. At any point, your fortunes could change. If the House committee leaves the sales tax out, it could get put in at a later point. If they put it in, it could get taken out at a later point. So you have to keep doing this process of building this campaign as it goes to the full House and the Senate and beyond. And even if, no matter whether you win or lose that year, things could start up again next year. If the sales tax was defeated, the chairman of the Revenue Committee could try to come back next year and push it. Or if it was included, you could try to get rid of it. ASID and IIDA and Brian and Emily can attest to this. Many times they'll spend years, a lot of time, fighting similar battles because certain issues do come up. And that's part of advocacy. People have the ability each year to propose changes in law, and you have to be prepared to keep fighting them. But what I can say from personal experience for many years is that if you develop your strategy, keep your eye on what the goal is, develop tactics that follow that strategy, be flexible with how you develop your strategy as things change, but keep your eye on the ball, you're going to succeed as an advocate far more often than you'll fail. So I really want to end where we started the very first webinar back in February, and say something I said back then, which is that government advocacy, advocating to your elected officials, isn't just a right. It's a responsibility. It's as important as voting on election day. It's what keeps our democracy working. It's so important that our founders put it into the First Amendment of the Constitution. Right next to free speech and free religion is the right to efficient government for the redress of grievances. That's how important it is that you do that. And remember, government policies will affect you and all interior designers, whether you're fighting, advocating, or not. So it's much better to be in the process and engaging on it. By engaging in that process, by being a good citizen of a democracy, you help to shape your profession's destiny. You help make the profession stronger. And honestly, it's fun. Engaging in advocacy and fighting for what you believe in is very fulfilling, and it's a lot of fun. And it's something that hopefully all of you will continue to do to help make sure that the profession can be as strong as it can be. So with that, I want to thank you so much, and I want to throw it back to Brian and Emily and see if there are any questions.
Well, thank you, Andrew. We will now take questions until the top of the hour. The question and answer period will not be recorded, but please use your question box to ask questions. Due to time constraints, we will not be able to answer all questions, but Andrew, Emily, and I are always available by email. And Andrew, the first question I think Emily and I will likely take, and that is, what other resources do ASID and IIDA offer for advocacy? Emily, I'll take the first stab at it, and then please join in. Jointly, we offer several resources. Over the last few years, ASID and IIDA have been more frequently than not co-branding advocacy resources. So obviously, we all have the same position on practice rights, tax issues, and so forth. So we have been co-branding those. So you can find those, I know, on the ASID website. I know Emily has those as well. We have a new state advocacy plan, which is a series of 2 phases and 11 steps overall, which chapters should be looking at if they're interested in seriously pursuing advocacy, whether it's practice rights or anything else that might require the hiring of outside consulting services or lobbyists. So again, that's on our chapter resources part of our website, and Emily has access to that as well. We have a draft MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that our chapters can use when doing joint advocacy between ASID and IIDA. If you're hosting legislators at a luncheon, or if you're doing a site visit or something, and you want to make sure you're dividing roles and responsibilities and financial commitment evenly, we have that as well. And Andrew mentioned our grassroots advocacy software, Phone to Action. We mentioned that at the end of every webinar. Text interior design to 52886. Again, that's interior design to 52886. And that way we can engage with you when an issue like this comes up. And we do need letters, emails, phone calls, and so forth. Also from ASID, we do have policy position statements on everything from tax to green building and other issues, so that interior designers can speak more articulately about the profession's position on those issues, as well as the impact interior designers have from a government advocacy standpoint. We have one-pagers, again, many co-branded with IIDA on a variety of different policy and political and advocacy issues. As Andrew mentioned, we do have testimonies, draft testimonies that have been used in other states on issues like tax, practice rights, and so forth. So if you're confused, don't know where to begin about how to talk about these issues or testify about these issues, we do have those issues. And lastly, ASID will be releasing probably in the next month a 30 or so page guide that's really soup to nuts, A to Z on advocacy and government affairs, what it is, how to do it, how to talk about it, and that'll be on our website, open to members of the profession regardless of affiliation. Emily, anything you want to add?
Sure, yeah, for any IIDA members on the phone, and really, this is, a lot of these resources can be available for all interior designers, but a few years ago, IIDA put together a variety of handbooks and guides to help you guys talk about the profession, talk about advocacy. So we have everything from a VP of Advocacy guide. So if you're on one of our boards as a VP of Advocacy, we have a guide of what your role is, and again, government affairs kind of 101, advocacy 101 available for you specifically. But in addition to that, we have, how to do a Capitol Day, we have how to plan a site visit, we have a fundraising guide, we have just various resources and handbooks and things like that that are available currently. So if there's ever any interest in looking at those, right now those are available to any interior designers. The only thing that's not is our specific VP of Advocacy guide, because that's if you're specifically on our chapter board. But all of those other resources, again, are generic. They're not specific to IIDA members necessarily. We want all interior designers to be able to get educated on this issue. So we do have a variety of resources there. If you're ever interested in looking at any of those, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to share them with you. And then I think most of you are probably familiar with this, but the one other thing that IIDA had commissioned a few years ago was an economic impact study. So we have about a 25-page white paper that discusses the economic impact of interior design throughout the country and on every individual state. So we also have state sheets where it breaks down how many jobs the industry creates in that state, and then the trickle-down effects of like tax dollars and things like that. So how that contributes to the economy of the state, and this is a good resource to use when talking to legislators. We're planning on doing a refresh of that in 2020, so more to come on that next year. But we do have that information available, and that's another good resource, I think, when you're talking to legislators. So that's just some of the examples that we have. I think that's it, Brian.
Thank you, Emily. Another question, Andrew, for you. Your presentation went from the perspective of knowing before the staff draft is released and going from trying to persuade the committee and the staff before a draft is released. But the question is, what if your first inkling that legislation will affect interior designers is from the actual introduction of a bill itself? How does your presentations change based on that?
Well, what I'd say is I think the main way it would change is really, I think the time frame would shrink. And I think this is really why doing advocacy kind of year round is so important, because having good relationships with all of the key members of the legislature, having engaged them, having met with them, talked to them about who interior designers are and what they do, so that when the big issue comes up, you're able to reach out fairly quickly and say this is a problem is more helpful. And that's a good point. I said in this that 3 weeks, it sounds like a short period of time to do a campaign. There may be times when you have 24 hours, or in an extreme case, or a few days. Ultimately, I think the general strategy is somewhat similar. The goal is similar, is that you want to get support of as many members as you can for your position. There's certain tactics that probably won't work within that time frame. Part of it also then is also understanding, having in the back of your mind, well, what would be a good compromise? What would be if something is moving quickly that is detrimental to interior designers, are there ways to fix it? In the case of a sales tax, that's somewhat binary. You don't want a tax, but if it's something involving a title, a practice bill, or something else, or a building code, there may be small tweaks that can make it better. And if you have to go to the sponsor or the key folks on the committee and say, there's some problems with this, but if you just make this small change, it's okay. You may be able to do that. So ultimately, the strategy of advocacy is going to be the same, no matter what. The goals are the same. You may have less time, but that's why it's really important to have those relationships early on as much as you can, so that when something happens very quickly, you're in a better position to reach out to members and get your point across.
Well, thank you, Andrew. We are almost at the top of the hour. There are several other questions that came across. Again, if you have other questions that weren't answered, please feel free to contact Emily, Andrew, or myself offline. We're happy to follow up. But we are at the top of the hour, so we'll conclude today's session. We look forward to hosting all of you next month in late January, hopefully, for the ASID National Codes and Standards Committee and our public policy webinar that will happen in late January. Joint Committee Chair Tracy Fillmore, NCIDQ, ASID CAPS Green AP RID for Florida, and the members of the ASID Codes and Standards Committee to learn more about its mission, work to date, upcoming initiatives, vision for the future, and how you can influence the next generation of construction, design, and professional codes and standards. Again, that'll be next month, late January, for the ASID Public Policy webinar. All members, all interior designers, regardless of affiliation, are welcome to join and listen to that. So be on the lookout for more information on that. We hope you enjoyed today's session and that you'll tell your colleagues and chapter members about these webinars. And always remember, for up-to-the-minute advocacy updates, join our Phone to Actions alert system by texting the